Hello everyone. I hope you are safe and sound and don't go out uh, for unnecessary trips. All right. Keep safe and healthy. All right. In terms of research method, where are we now? At the beginning of the class, we talked about what's research. Research is about asking questions, and what's research method is to find the best methods, either qualitative or quantitative, to find the best answers, right? So we talked about the interview case studies. The most important technique is content analysis for qualitative studies. Well, for the quantitative one, we are going to talk about experiments later, but currently we are discussing survey data analysis, right? So to suppose this is you collect your own data, use your own survey, so that will be a primary research, right? The first thing you need to understand is the measurements of variable, different levels of measurements. So then we talked about sampling strategies. For sampling, you need to understand the relationship between your sample and your population, and whether or not you are going to use a particular random sampling strategy or non-random sampling strategy, right? Then we talked about suppose you collect all data, how can we create descriptive statistics or even visualize some of the variables. And we talked about OLS, ordinary linear square regression. So this is the simple linear model, right? So between one independent variable and one dependent variable. Now in this class, we are going to talk about multiple variable regression, right? So multivariable regression. So what is multivariable regression, and why should we consider multivariable regression instead of OLS? And finally, how can we do it? The first thing is let's refresh our memory, right? For the simple linear model, we have one independent variable and one dependent variable, right? So then you hypothesize the relationship of an explanation why you think the relationship should be positive or negative, right? So then you use OLS to test it. And for the multiple variable regression model, so this is just this is for example from one independent variable and expanded it to more than one independent variable, right? So let's look at the this equation that represents a multivariable regression model. All right, so y is our dependent variable, and x1 is our first independent variable, and x2 is our second independent variable. And of course, you can have x3, x4, so on and so forth, right? As long as you think these variables are necessary. All right, so the b1, of course, will be the coefficients between your x1 and y, right? B2 will be the coefficients between your second independent variable and your dependent variable, right? So I asked you to find a paper that used multivariable regressions, right? So I want you to introduce the paper to the class and Blackboard discussion multivariable regression. So then you click it, you can create a thread, and then you can attach the paper in your thread, all right? So here, in the following time, I'm going to talk about some of the papers I find or co-authored by me and my colleagues. So the first paper you probably is familiar with because I said that the table was wrong, right? If your dependent variable is between yes and no, that should be nominal, then we cannot use like mean and standard deviation. That doesn't make any sense, right? Instead, we are going to use percentage. So for instance, volunteer in 2007, that means no, one means yes, then 38% 0.4%. That's probably the correct format we are going to use. The thing I want to explain a bit is about the independent variables, right? Because now we are talking about multivariable regression. So this is whether or not you get information from accrediting agencies, whether or not you get information from media, like newspaper, magazine, television, things like that. And the third one is whether or not you get information from online platform, right? Information from organizational websites, social media, things like that. And then the fourth channel, information source channel, is word of mouth. So from information from your friends, family, and colleagues, things like that. And the last one is you get the information about nonprofit organization from your personal experience. Now, personal experience could be you either volunteered or interned for the organization, or you donated to them, right? Either way, you get information from your personal experience. So we want to see whether or not you get information from different sources. Will this actually influence your giving decisions in terms of giving time, which is volunteering, or giving money, which is donation? Right? So I want you to focus on this model, all right? That means volunteer in 2007, all right? And these are the independent variables. So this is a multivariable regression model, all right? So this is a regression table. So the first one is the accrediting agency, second independent variable median, third one online platform, fourth word of mouth, and fifth personal experience, sixth past volunteer experience, and seventh past donation experience. So these are the results. Now the star indicates a significant relationship, statistically significant relationship, which means p-value is less than 0.05, while these numbers, right? So on top, not in the parentheses, means coefficients, and in the parentheses means standard deviation, right? And this is R squared over there. All right, so let's take a look at this particular one, right? So the coefficient is 0.618, and the relationship is significant, which means p-value less than 0.05 again, right? So how are you going to interpret this relationship? Now we can see it's positive, right? So statistically, you're going to interpret start from 1 unit change in your independent variable. So what do we mean 1 unit change in personal experience? From 0 to 1, right? From no, I didn't get information from my personal experience, to yes, I got information about nonprofits from my personal experience, which means if you got information from your personal experience, then we say how many units change in Y? 0.618 units change in Y. But remember, Y is also coded a yes or no, right? Yeah, so that means whether or not you volunteered in 2007, 0 means no, I didn't volunteer. 1 means yes, I did volunteer. So that's 0.618 actually means 61.8% probability you are going to volunteer in 2007. So in sum, you are going to interpret the relationship, since it's significant, you are going to interpret it like this. If you got information about nonprofits from your personal experience, you are 61.8% probability more likely to volunteer in 2007. right? So this actually measures the odds ratio, right? So 61.8%. All right, so this is how you're going to interpret the results. And if we check the R square. Now remember, when your dependent variable is yes or no nominal, right? So we are going to use O legit. So this doesn't show the ordinal R square. Instead, it show you a pseudo R square, which is a little bit different, like the OLS model. But anyway, so the number is 0.372, which means 37.2% of the total variation can be explained by the model. So generally, we would say this is probably a acceptable model, right? All right, let's talk about another paper written by Hamidullah, Greg Van Rysing, and me. All right, so this is a paper I talked about when we talk about the dark side of the academic world, right? Because our results shows that personality largely determine public service motivation. So you can't educate people to increase them public service motivation score, which probably pissed off a lot of big figures in this field. So that's why the paper got so many rejections. But anyway, let's talk about the dependent variable, public service motivation. It's an index and measured by different items, right? And the first independent variable sex, second age, third race, and the first is actually our big five personalities. So that from since it's big five, so which means it has 5 different dimensions, right? So so that measures our dependent variable, public service motivation. So you can track the details, but here I just want to say, okay, this is indexed together. So this is a brief version of 20 items indexed together. Then you come up with the public service motivation score, right? So this one actually measures the big five personalities. So sex, age, and these things are easy, right? So but this is also a long-established measure in psychology, right? So the 5 different dimensions: agreeableness, consciousness, emotional stability, extraversion, and openness. So this is our independent variable. So this is a relationship. All right, so this is spring 2012, this is fall 2012. We use 2 different scales for the public service motivation score. So, but they are all indexed, so basically there's no significant difference, all right? So let's look at this model, okay? So what you're gonna look at is first the sex. But it's without stars. All right. So only the stars means here. Okay. So if 1 star is 0, less than 0.1. 2 star, 3 star means less than p-value less than 0.05, which indicates significant, statistically significant relationship. Right. So let's focus on this one. Agreeableness, right? So the interpretation, right? So 1 unit change in agreeableness can result in how many units change in public service motivation score? So 0.499, right? So close to 0.5. Okay, so what do we mean by 1 unit change in agreeableness? Now let's go back a look. All right, take a look at it because it's an ordinal measure, right? From 1 to 5, and strongly disagree to strongly agree, right? So 1 unit change means strongly disagree to somewhat disagree to neutral to somewhat agree to strongly agree, right? So anyway, 1 unit change could mean different things. But generally speaking, we would say, okay, 1 unit change means you are more agreeable. All right, so then it will increase your public service motivation score. Right, so this is the in plain language explanation. But in statistical language, you're actually going to say if agreeableness increased one category, right? Like jump from the lowest to a highest to a higher category, from neutral to somewhat agree, for instance, it will result in an increase in public service motivation by 0.499 scale points, because that one is indexed, our dependent variable is indexed, right? But in plain language, you are going to say if you are more agreeable, you are going to have a higher public service motivation score, and the relationship is significant, right? And if you check the model, it's 16.1% variation can be explained by the model. It's not very high, but since we are only looking at very few variables, we will still say, oh, that's probably acceptable. All right, so the third paper I want to talk about is written by Janet Weiss and Sandy Piderit. So the value of mission statement in public agencies, they look at the public schools, right? So as I mentioned, my goal is you can only look at the regression table and understand the basic idea about the paper. So let's take a look at this, all right? So reading math, school performance. So this is a dependent variable, right? So let's look at the last model here, the reading score here, all right? So there's a mission statement. This is the independent variable because this is either high middle school or wealthy per students, but the authors label them as control variables instead of labeling them as independent variables, because these variables probably is not their main research interest, right? So they are more interested in if the mission statement contain these contents, right? So let's look at the last model, and we discovered here this indicates a significant relationship, right? So that means the independent variable is coded yes or no, right? Whether your mission statement contains all children can learn. Now, this is a surprising finding, because if the 1 unit change means yes, our mission statement have all children can learn, right? And this is a reading score, so it's 0.1, but it's a minus. So 1 unit change means if a school's mission contains all children can learn, it will decrease students' reading score by 0.1 point, right? And the relationship is significant, which means if you emphasize all children can learn, it's probably not good for their reading score. Now, this is a surprising finding. It's published a long time ago in JPA, Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory, one of the top journals in our field. Right, so I remember this is because this is very counterintuitive, right? If you emphasize all children can learn, it's actually gonna worse their reading score.